Hello, thank you for tuning in to my IGEL 2022 lecture entitled Poetry, Freewriting and the Self-Discovery Process. My name is David Hanauer, and I look forward to actually seeing you in person by Zoom and discussing the outcomes of this particular presentation. Now, as you might know, I have for the last about a decade, a bit more than a decade, been very interested in writing processes which can be used as a research method. And this led me to consider the question of how is it that within writing we actually find out something about ourselves. And that basically is the core research agenda that I'm going to be presenting here today. And it's also the same research agenda that I presented last year at IGEL. Now, as you can see from the title, Poetry, Free Writing, and the Self-Discovery Process, I'm going to be dealing with two types of writing, two genres, poetry and free writing. Now, the idea that writing leads to self-discovery is not a new one, and there are multiple types of genre within which this has been described. The problem has been, I think, that there's not a very good explanation of how this actually happens, but you have here a nice list of well-known methodologies, pedagogies that have been used for self-discovery in writing. The best known of these, of course, is expressive writing. Now, for expressive writing, we do have a really nicely documented set of outcomes which show that expressive writing does lead to both psychological, behavioral, and physical positive outcomes, including reducing stress, behavioral outcomes in improved grades, reducing length of unemployment, and even physical things like fatigue and chronic pain. What we don't have so much of, and it's interesting if you actually look at the expressive writing outcomes literature, the explanations they give don't address the writing piece nearly at all. They address psychology, they address issues of inhibition and so on, but they aren't really focused on how writing helps or leads to some form of self-discovery. So this is primarily where I am in this research process. I intend to continue this in the coming year. But at the moment, I'm interested in two types of question, and they're integrated. At what point in the writing process does self-discovery occur, if at all? And within what type of writing process does self-discovery emerge, if at all? And when I speak about type of writing process, I'm going to be very specific in just 1 second. So we do know something about discovery in the writing process. It's not well researched, but there are some theoretical orientations, and I'd like to present them to you. So the first one is a very old but very well-known model of writing, Flower and Hayes process model of writing. And they assumed basically that if there is any form of discovery or insight or understanding which emerges from writing, it actually happens much later in the process, somewhere in the stage of strategic problem solving, where you express and work with materials that you've already developed and change them in certain ways. A more developed and much better model, I should say, by Galbraith and by Jean from 2018 proposes a dual process model. They propose that there are two ways in which self-discovery emerges or insight emerges. One is called the knowledge constituting process, and this is the fast, effortless, not demanding working memory movement of text generation from memory into text. And they say that that process can involve a discovery process, and I'm going to speak a lot about that a bit later on. The other process is what we just saw in Flower and Hayes, the knowledge transforming process, in which this is the slow, effortful, controlled, demanding working memory type of process where you're evaluating and manipulating ideas and text in order to achieve rhetorical goals. It's basically the Flower and Hayes model's idea of where discovery emerges. So we have two routes, if you like, the knowledge constituting route and the knowledge transforming route, both leading to discovery. The knowledge constituting route basically involves a fast synthesis of memory traces into text, and that movement from memory traces into text is what leads to insight. And the second process is a slow, controlled, reflective engagement with the text, which leads to finding new insights. Okay, as I said in the beginning, I'm going to be dealing with two types of writing, poetry writing and free writing. I should say that my research agenda will involve other types of writing. One of the reasons I wanted to deal with free writing is that it has an interesting overlap with expressive writing, which I'll talk about in just 1 second. So this is my version of autoethnographic poetry writing. Basically, we're talking about individuals writing about their experiences, and by writing about their experiences, they present a multisensory emotional information, which for them is a surprise as it is for their readers. I discussed this at length last year, and I think that lecture is still attainable. But let me just quickly say something about what this process looks like. When we boil down all the different models of poetry writing, we basically come to two types of stages, which are recurrent and recursive. There is a generation stage, which is language play, free of associations, wandering thought. And then there is a revision stage, which is deliberative thinking, aesthetic judgments, use of poetic features, where you condense this sort of material that you found into a poetic form. Discovery emerges somewhere along this transition between the generation and the revision stage. That is the assumption and the interaction between the two. If we go back to the two models that we have of discovery and writing, the generation stage is basically a knowledge constitution model, and the revision stage is basically a knowledge transformation process. Free writing might be less known to you. What characterizes free? It's a very well and widely used pedagogy within the composition classroom. What characterizes this particular form of writing is that you ask students or participants, if you like, to spontaneously produce language, importantly, without the inhibiting processes of correct grammar, word choice, and text organization. So basically, you ask students to sit down, write about something without thinking too much about issues of form or accuracy. So a more of a stream of thought sort of process where you're just elaborating on what you're writing. The interaction with expressive writing, which is interesting, is that this is often a repeated form. And in the expressive writing paradigm, it is true that you're asked to think about a particular significant moment in your life, if you like. However, you're also asked to repeat this and just write about it without the inhibiting process. And in some ways, I see the poetry writing and the free writing as combining together to talk about expressive writing, which will be my next research project. For free writing prompts, we can think of two basically repeated generation stage type writing processes. Discovery apparently emerges from this. So think of an initial uninhibited writing process followed by a continued writing process. And think of a knowledge constitution model ×2. You repeat it, basically. Now, I did want to say a quick word about creativity research, and there is an interesting overlap between the poetry writing model, which is not surprising, I think, and general assumptions about creativity. So, you know, Liu et al. 2015 paper, which connected between general creativity and the poetry writing process, found distinct brain patterns associated with these two types of stages, a generation stage which basically involves actively reducing cognitive control. Think of uninhibited writing or the free movement of thought into something else. And then a revision stage, which is engaged cognitive control. And once again, we have these two types of process which overlap nicely with the types of writing that lead to discovery, knowledge constitution, and knowledge transformation. As I said, my research questions, I put it here in one question: at what point and what type of writing process does self-discovery occur at all, if at all? And we have two types of writing process, and if you look at the top level of this, we can see that actually we have two different types of process here. For poetry writing, we have a generation phase followed by a revision phase. For free writing, we basically have two generation phases. So there are timed processes that we have here. And we have here all the potential hypotheses that we could have here, that we have high discovery in both stages, that we have low discovery in both stages, that we have high discovery followed by low discovery, or low discovery followed by high discovery. So we have a range of options. Now, of course, when you work with real genres, this is not a full empirical design. There are lots of other options here. But it is interesting that we're talking about a knowledge constitution plus a knowledge transformation model for poetry writing. And for free writing, we're talking about a knowledge constitution plus a knowledge constitution. I would point out that free writing, similar to expressive writing, involves knowledge constitution followed by knowledge constitution. So there is an overlap there. So let's talk about the method and how the study was done. So the survey design was quite simple. We had random assignment to either a poetry writing or a free writing exercise. There was a first set of writing prompts. This was followed by pre-scales, or the first set of scales, which were insight and emotional clarity, and I'll present them in a minute. That was then followed by a second set of writing prompts, once again for poetry writing and free writing, and then once again the same set of scales, insight and emotional clarity. So if you like, a pre and post design with two sets of prompts in the middle. The poetry writing prompts involved, prompt 1 was a generation phase, which involved eliciting a significant memory. Prompt 2 was a revision stage, which involved image writing and revision. I'm not going to go over these full prompts here, but you can always stop the video and read them carefully yourselves. But I do want to point out that prompt 1 asks for thinking of a significant moment in life, which is, if you like, parallel to the expressive writing prompt. And then you are asked to choose a focus on images, see, feel, smell, hear, taste, and so on. And then in the second stage, you're trying to distill that into one image and then revise that image. For the free writing prompts, we basically have the same prompt times 2. This was a mundane memory elicitation followed by a continued memory elicitation. Once again, you have here the full set of prompts, and you can stop the video if you want to read them carefully. But basically, in the space below, I'd like you to write about the event that happened to you today. Don't worry about spelling, sentence, grammar, structure, and so on. Write for 3 minutes. Okay, so how did I define self-discovery? I define self-discovery as involving two components, a cognitive understanding component and an emotional component. So increased insight, cognitive understanding of one's experience, and increased emotional clarity about one's experience. I adapted sales from Grant et al. 2002. This is for the insight scales. I have a clear idea about why I behaved the way I did in this experience. I understand this experience. I can make sense of this experience. I should point out that these set of scales and the emotional clarity scales, I did run psychometrics validation on these scales before using them in this study. The emotional clarity scales were adapted from Gretz and Roma, 2004. I know exactly how I'm feeling about this event. I am clear about my feelings about this event. I have difficulty making sense about this event. I have no idea how I'm feeling about this event. I'm confused about how I feel about this event. 3, 4, and 5 are reversed, scaled, so that we would have, so the results would be readable and understandable. And participants were all in composition courses, freshman and sophomore, at 3 northeastern US universities. They were all first language writers. I do have data from second language writers, but that adds an extra level of complexity that I'm not going to go into here at the moment. I had 60 poetry writing students and 57 free writing students, 65 male, 49 female, 3 other, and all data was collected according to the IRB from IUP. Let's talk about results. Okay, so I ran a two-way repeated measures ANOVA with one between, that was writing condition, and one within factors, prompt writing. And as you can see here quite clearly in the graph itself, we have two different trajectories for the poetry writing in the light blue and for the free writing in the green. There is a significant interaction here. Poetry writing starts very high and drops. It doesn't drop significantly, but it drops. And we have free writing, which starts low and has a non-significant increase. There is a significant difference between the two writing conditions, but we have a very particular movement here, which is of interest. The same two-way repeated measures ANOVA with one between and one within factor were done for emotional clarity. Here we have two. Once again, we have a significant interaction here. What we can see from the poetry writing condition is it starts high but stays flat or a very slight decrease. There is a significant difference between the poetry writing and the free writing at point 1 in relation to the emotional clarity, but we also see an interesting process in which from point 1 to point 2 for free writing there is a significant increase in emotional clarity. Let me summarize those results for you. So remember, my question is, at what point in what type of writing process does self-discovery occur, if at all? So self-discovery does occur. We have high levels way above the 3.5 middle mark. We're talking around about the 5 and the 6s for, close to 6s for poetry writing. So for poetry writing, the generation phase elicited high levels of insight and emotional clarity in the generation stage. However, the revision stage didn't add anything to those initial high levels. So for poetry writing, I think we can say that self-discovery is situated in the generation phase and is situated in a knowledge constitution model. For free writing, we have an interesting situation. We do have relatively high levels of insight in the generation phase. However, what's really interesting is that we have increased emotional clarity in the second generation stage. So once again, we have self-discovery occurring within the knowledge constitution, but at the second stage. Think for a second what this might mean potentially in relation to expressive writing, that the repetition of the exploration of your experience leads to emotional clarity, which happens at the second point. And we can perhaps assume in the third and fourth points as well in the expressive writing paradigm. So what are my conclusions here? So first and foremost, I think self-discovery is situated in the generative, uninhibited stage of writing where non-verbal information is translated into written language. We had two modes for this. For poetry writing, the particular prompt we used was very good at eliciting high levels of insight and emotional clarity. It really worked well, and you can look at the numbers yourself a bit later on. For the repeated free writing process, we saw that it increases emotional clarity at the second stage. So the repeated usage of this uninhibited writing even for a very mundane experience, elicited high levels of emotional clarity, and I think that's quite important. So let me end very quickly with a preliminary model of self-discovery. I think what's going on in this particular process is that initially we have memorial traces that are not verbally represented. When we do generative writing, which involves an increased representation of non-verbal experience into verbal representation, we also get an increase in self-discovery. So I think it's that translation of stored experience, which is non-verbal, into verbal representation, where self-discovery really happens in writing. Thank you for watching. I look forward to discussing this with you in person at the in-person video session. And if you have any questions, please write to me. And I look forward to speaking to you. That's it for now.